Now, Chris, the Prime Minister today said that it would cost less than $400 million a year. Obviously, there's going to be a large industry contribution towards that. Is that too much of a burden?
Well, we have no idea what the burden is. This $400 million, this is the first we've heard of it. We don't really know what data is going to be required to be kept, because that will be defined in regulations. $400 million from the little that we know about this and from estimates of how much data retention costs both here and overseas is a really, really low figure. If it's $400 million, that's really low. It's still an incredibly high sum. I mean, it's 1%, or the Prime Minister was happily saying that it's around 1% of the entire value of the telecommunications sector in Australia. That's incredibly high, especially given that the government is also, at the other hand, trying to say that they're deregulating the economy and bringing value back into the economy and away from regulation. I think it's a very high sum. Even although, to be honest, I don't believe it. I don't know where that figure came from. The Attorney General's Department has been telling us over and over that they don't know how much it's going to cost. It sort of beggars belief that this sum has just arisen over the last couple of days.
But Chris, what about the Prime Minister's argument that there will be all these unsolved crimes if the metadata laws are not introduced?
Well, there's really no evidence to back that up. I understand that a lot of security agencies and police law enforcement agencies would like data retention, but we've had data retention in a number of other countries, and the evidence is very, very clear that data retention hasn't increased the rate of crime clearance. It hasn't solved any more crimes. In fact, in countries like Germany, where they got rid of data retention, they saw no impact before and after, and crime clearance rates continued to go down the same trajectory that they had. There's a lot of assertions in this debate. There's a lot of unnecessary metaphors. There's a lot of confusion. But the evidence for mandatory data retention is not there, and they've been looking for it for many years. It's still not there.
Because the rhetoric around this was quite strong from the Prime Minister today. He talked of it being a form of unilateral disarmament if data retention laws didn't go through. Has the government made the case, do you think?
They've only made half the case. I think it's fairly easy to argue that metadata is very useful in solving crimes. Certainly, New South Wales Police and a lot of agencies have told the Joint Intelligence Committee that they are frequent users of metadata. Very often it's replaced old-fashioned surveillance in solving crimes. The Bravehearts example was given today because Bravehearts gave a very strong submission to that committee, giving the example of child sexual abuse, that tracking internet predators, metadata is really, really useful. But that's only half of the argument. If we want these laws to be useful laws for Australia, you've got to look at privacy and oversight. The community has said very strongly, very clearly, that if you want my metadata for 2 years, assure me that it's not going to be abused. Show me how there can be some oversight in the same way that the warrant scheme is used for phone taps. And in New South Wales, we've had a really explosive parliamentary inquiry here looking at police bugging police. Police that were bugged were very unhappy at the privacy intrusion, and it's really shown that there needs to be oversight, that police simply going to a senior officer and saying, oh, I'd like the metadata, that's not good enough.
Sam, what's your view on this? Is there enough oversight?
Well, look, there's two large problems that are yet undefined coming out of this, in addition to the cost, and that is absolutely a key consideration. The first is how much does this apply to journalists? Are their sources going to be subject to this? Is their metadata going to be trawled through to figure out who's been talking to who and blowing whistles on which government department? That's a serious concern. The second, and it's quite a technical point, so bear with me, but the second point is that the data set as to what is actually in metadata land, that's contained in regulations, not in the legislation. Now, I think the Labor Party has quite wisely said, no, that needs to be in the legislation. Therefore, and the critical point for this is that right now, any Attorney General gets in, they have the ability to change regulations without reference to the Parliament, without reference to parliamentary debate. That's not the case if it goes into the actual bill itself, into the legislation.
Chris, that's a key point, isn't it? Because there is no definition in the current bill of what metadata actually is.
No, and that's no surprise, because the idea of metadata is trying to apply a concept from traditional phone networks onto the internet. And there's a massive amount of data on the internet that could be called metadata. I think the most sensible people in this debate abandon the concept of metadata at all. It is all just data. It's all just information. The information that the law enforcement agencies and security agencies want is the most useful information they could glean off all our activities online and even out and about. What they really want is information about what we're doing. Metadata is a bit of a nonsense word that gets thrown around or used in inappropriate metaphors and so forth, but it doesn't really mean anything. It's just data about what we do.